inside of the door was covered in flies. We stepped back and looked at the rest of the house, and the windows on either side, they were also covered, absolutely covered in flies. We went to the kitchen window and looked through that window to see if we could see anything. The floor, I'd never been in their house, and I assumed it had black vinyl, like, until I noticed it was actually moving. The whole floor was literally covered in flies and blue bottles. And we noticed more flies on the other window, and I said to my daughter, I said, well, we have to go back, we'll have to get in touch with the police, there's something wrong. So we phoned the police, and they came within about 20 minutes.
They gained entry to the house, which looked like there had also may have been a burglary as well, because of a broken glass round to the side of the house. The police gained entry and immediately realised that they were in a crime scene. They didn't advance very further because it was clear that the occupants of the house were dead.
They were met with a very disturbing scene. The bodies were left exactly where they'd fallen some six weeks earlier.
A murder hunt has been launched on Merseyside after an elderly couple were found dead at their home. They were found in Melling. Police say their bodies were heavily decomposed.
What they found was two bodies that they thought at first had been shot, and certainly that's the information that I was given, that there appeared to be signs of a burglary and the occupants had been shot, which of course gives a whole different impression about what actually has taken place. But the state of the bodies was such that they were unable, just on a visual check, to establish what the cause of death was, and we'd have to wait a couple of days later for the post-mortem findings of that.
The police were keen to find Brian Blackwell to tell him of his parents' deaths. They tracked him down to his girlfriend Amal Saba's house, where he'd been staying since they returned from America more than 3 weeks before.
I sent 2 officers out to that address, and shortly afterwards Brian arrived in the car that we'd been looking for. They went into the house, which is Amal's home, where Amal and her mother were, and they broke the news to Brian that his parents had been found in the house and were both dead. He reacted like you would expect from somebody who'd been given such awful news. He was stunned and then became very upset about what had taken place, but then felt that it couldn't be them because they were in Spain.
The police wanted to speak to Brian because they knew from inquiries that he was likely to have been the last person to have seen his parents. To that extent, he wasn't a suspect initially, but as soon as the police arrived at Amal's house and spoke to him, they obviously suspected that he knew a lot more than he was initially telling them.
My suspicions had fallen on Brian quite early on, but it was something he said that really confirmed those suspicions when he spoke to one of the officers and quite out of context asked him if prison was cold. At that point I decided that Brian was to be arrested for the murder of his parents. As time was going on with the interviews, that Brian was gaining in confidence and becoming more sure of himself. It was a tactic of ours that in the initial parts of the interview we would simply ask Brian. Brian would simply be asked for his explanation, his whereabouts, and his account of what had gone on over the weeks, and that little, or if any, challenge was going to be made to anything that he said.
It was very curious. He didn't necessarily exhibit the signs that one might expect of a young man whose parents had been so brutally slain in their own home. One gets the impression that he felt he could almost lie his way out of trouble, even at that stage, even in the police station. And there's a suggestion that he probably felt that he was cleverer in some way than those interviewing him.
I'm here, obviously, because the police suspect me for doing this. I've been asked a number of what I consider to be slightly relevant questions. I believe that should be done more as a witness rather than a suspect. The reason I was arrested was because I admitted to going to the house. There's other people who have been up to the house, so obviously in my mind I'm wondering why they haven't been arrested. But I think I've proven that I've not been here when it's happened. And obviously, if I wasn't here to do it, then I shouldn't be held.
While Brian Blackwell was being interviewed, Police were carrying out round-the-clock searches of the Blackwells and Amal's house for evidence which would lead them to the killer.
It was during the course of one of those evenings that a bag was found which belonged to Brian, that had actually been they'd asked him to put into the garage because it somewhat smelt. They opened the bag and in it was found a hammer, but more importantly a set of keys to the house. Now Brian had always maintained throughout that he couldn't have gained access to the house because he didn't have keys for it and that he'd been locked out of the house and therefore couldn't go